an introduction. A lot of this talk is informed by my former careers. I did start my career early in the days of Andy Grove at Intel, and I was serving in a project management function at the time, kind of a high stakes project management function. We were starting up capital equipment factories around the world. So these would be like $5–10 billion factories, and I was in charge of selecting and onboarding some new capital equipment suppliers. And if things didn't go well, I was either on the phone yelling at people or on the phone getting yelled at. So it was a very intense time in my career. And then I went back to school, got an M.B.A. and a systems engineering degree, and spent some time in the world of product management. So I did sales, I did marketing, a couple different product management functions, and then started to do some innovation work, and subsequently left Intel and started my own consulting business. But I do have a number of clients that have tried to make this transition from project to product. I feel like I do have a bit of experience, having been a former project manager and former product manager, so I could kind of see the world from both of those, both sides of the fence in some ways. And this is going to be a very accelerated talk. There's probably 2 hours worth of material here for you. So we'll kind of hit the high points and keep the story short and succinct. But I'm always happy to continue the conversation on LinkedIn or other places if you want to go further. So today's talk is about navigating the shift from product to product. And a lot of clients say we want to shift to product. And I often like to take a step back as a good, coach consultant would, and say, okay, what is the problem we're trying to solve here? And I meant this to be a bit of an interactive discussion with all of you today. So if you guys could participate in chat and let me know what you think about this set of problems. So in general, when I think about the shift from project to product, it's typically to solve one of 4 problems. And maybe there's another major category that I'm missing. Feel free to chime in on that. But what do you think is the main problem we're trying to solve here? One is kind of a lack of a holistic approach to product development. We have this weird thing that happens when we manage product development as a set of projects, where we have a period of time where we're developing some new products, new functionality, and then we hand it off to support. And that support is a different project, perhaps keep the business running budget. And that creates some weird, idiosyncrasies with regards to how products are developed and who's responsible for supporting them long-term, what some of the product management and product design decisions that are made, because the team that builds it is not necessarily the team that supports it. Problem number 2 is we need to be more customer-centric. Maybe an organization is struggling in the marketplace. They need to have more innovation, more innovative products, serve their customers better. So that's another reason why some organizations choose to shift from project to product. Many just need a nimbler budget and funding model. The classic annual budgeting cadence does calcify some organizations and prevents things from happening on demand when they should. And then, of course, we have this organizational silo, perhaps, between technology, IT, and business, and creates a bit of an us versus them mode. So feel free to chime into chat with what do you think are some of the problems that you're experiencing in terms of why you're interested in a project to product shift. And if I'm forgetting something, feel free to chime in with your own answer. And with that, we'll move on. So please chime in with some answers there. I'd be very curious to see what you guys think about that. So a little bit more on the nature of projects and products. Was that a question? Okay. Projects, I think there's some interesting etymology here. It means to, a project is something that is thrown forth, right? It's certainly been used in the context as a scheme, a mental plan, a proposal going back to the 1600s. PMI defines a project as a temporary effort to create value through a unique product, service, or result. And while I think projects are not products, I think it is certainly the case that we could say that many projects are used to build products. So in that way, I sometimes like to think of projects as scaffolding. So it's something, and project management as scaffolding for that matter. It's something that you erect for a period of time while the building gets developed and constructed, and then it gets taken down. And what remains is the product, the building itself. But the project is, and project management is more like scaffolding for that building. Of course, we have products as well. So this is one definition of product, something that is brought forth. And I don't think there's really a common shared definition of product. This is my own definition of product. It's something that's tangible or intangible, something that's really produced or marketed and exchanged to satisfy the wants and needs of customers. I do like this idea of maybe taking a little bit of time to reflect on the product on the right-hand side of the slide. I think many of you will recognize this product. Feel free to jump into chat if you recognize this product. And I think an easy answer to say is like, this looks like some sort of, wireless headphones, Apple AirPods, for example. And if we were the product team, assigned to curate and develop this product, I think it's interesting to think about where you would draw the boundaries of the product. Is it really just this physical thing? Well, of course not. It's not just the physical thing. There's probably some chips and firmware that go into the AirPods. There's the software on your iPhone that supports it. There's all the services that goes around this product. If it is defective and you need to ship it back, or you need some help troubleshooting, what about all the onboarding that you need to train and develop a new user that's not familiar with wireless headphones? What about all the interfaces and platforms that it relies on, like Bluetooth, right? So very quickly, this thing that we thought was as simple as a case with a couple of headphones becomes almost an unwieldy beast, right? This product that we essentially call wireless headphones as shorthand. It's many, many different things. So it's ingredients, it's platforms, it's a solution. And maybe you could also argue it's the Apple ecosystem, right? That's another aspect of the product. So product management really is, for me at least, a different kind of scaffolding for building a product. So as we think about the shift from project to product, I like to think of it as a shift in orientation and a shift in the scaffolding, or this way of working. And so we'll unpack this throughout this talk. When I was trying to organize my thoughts around this idea of project to product, it was a bit of a going down the rabbit hole exercise. I felt a little bit like Alice in that way. It's a little bit hard to kind of wrap your head around all the various aspects of what this shift may mean. And the way I'm constructing this talk is in terms of two groups. There's kind of waypoints, which is almost like intermediate stepping stones. I think these are things that almost every development organization could do, even if you are entrenched in the world of projects with annual budgeting cycles. There are some nice intermediate steps that you can consider adopting and embracing wherever you're at. And then there's kind of the more advanced things that are going to take time. It's kind of like charting uncharted seas in the open ocean. It'll take you a long time to get across them. So we're going to start with the easy stuff and then wrap up with the hard stuff. So one easy way to get started on the shift is to start having more iterative projects. So maybe you're not able to change your entire development or organization, the way that development is done, but maybe you could at least make things a little bit more iterative. So think about taking what a typical project size is for your organization and breaking it down into smaller phases. And this is especially important when market conditions and product development dynamics are unclear, complex, uncertain. The smaller you could break down these phases, the better. So for example, if you have a typical project duration of maybe 3 months, how do you chunk that down into 3-month long increments? Phase 1, phase 2, phase 3. And I think really the key here is that each of these chunks have to be used in production. So it's really about getting something out there into users' hands where they could start using it and start to use it to get a job done, or do their business function, whatever that happens to be, and you can start to get feedback. And that feedback would inform the second phase and the third phase. When I was a product owner at Intel, I was running a project. It got funded, and it was essentially to build almost like a reporting dashboard for our annual budgeting cycle for one of the major divisions. This would be like a division of maybe 6,000 people or so. And we had all this work coming in, and we needed a way to triage the work requests and figure out which ones we're going to fund, which things were above the line and below the line. And so management and the powers that be wanted a way to kind of visualize the system. And we did a very quick triage of the things that it had to do, kind of like your must-haves, and we delivered those first. And then we did kind of the nice-to-haves and did that second, and then kind of the fine-tuning, polishing UX stuff to make it really easy to use as the third iteration of that project that I ran. So that's one simple example. Another easy way to start this shift from project to product is to change your success criteria. So a classic, I think, way of thinking about project success is about meeting the objectives within time, scope, and budget. And then, of course, we have things like desirability, feasibility, viability, meeting the outcomes of a certain product. So those are two ways of thinking about success. And so I think everyone here has probably seen the project management iron triangle. And this is another maybe opportunity for people to chime in on the chat. But does anyone recognize this framework? Right, so what is this framework about? Business, customer, technology. Where do you think it is from? If you recognize this, what company do you associate with this? Three amigos, that's good. And when do you think this was developed? DevOps, okay, that's a good answer, good guess. This may surprise many of you, but this framework is actually quite old. It dates back to 2005, right? So this has been out there for a while, and I got this from a book on project management. So if you are a freshly minted project manager in 2005, you may have read this book and been exposed to this idea that successful projects balance three perspectives: the business perspective, the technology perspective, and the customer's perspective. So this framework is actually a project management framework circa 2005. And I certainly think it has its roots in companies like, IDEO and Don Norman and things of that nature. And we'll talk a little bit more about a version of this model that we used at Intel. But an easy waypoint here is to think about shifting project success. Instead of just measuring scope, cost, time, quality, start to think about your projects in terms of what are the customer outcomes that you'd like to deliver, what are the business goals you're trying to deliver, what technology needs to be developed for your projects. Another easy intermediate step is stable teams. I think this is another really nice waypoint. So I think everyone recognizes that when you have a stable team, it gives you time to develop trust, respect, cohesion, and eventually you kind of work your phases through the Tuckman model to have a high performing team, and this takes time. Typically, project teams are very fractured and fractioned. And what we mean by that is you get 25% of a person for this period of time, combined with half a person from this organization, combined with a tenth of a person, whatever that is, from this other organization. It all gets cobbled together for a quarter, and that is your project team. So to the degree that you can, how do you string together several projects over time so that you can have a more stable team? One of the clients I was working with was trying to make this transition. They were standing up 2 arts, and they had, I don't know, somewhere in the order of maybe 8 or so epics that they were feeding to these 2 arts. And that was those 8 epics were easily going to take them 2 years or so. And so they wound up getting enough funding for the arts to kind of pay for salaries and whatnot for the year. And one of the exercises we were going through is we were looking at all the capabilities that these two arts needed to deliver. And if you add up all the capabilities that you found on their roadmap over the course of a year, you could kind of aggregate how many database developers you need, how many different people do you need from organization X versus Y versus Z. And if you could get those people together and at least get them, penciled in on these project teams to work together on the art for a dedicated period of time for a year, that's one way to start to stabilize some of these fractured project teams. So there's going to be a few other things that are going to be much more difficult. Those were the easy steps for you. One of the harder things to shift is that of skill sets. So project management absolutely is a profession. You could spend 10, 20 years as a successful project manager. Product management is also a profession. You could spend 10, 20 years as a product manager. And this is the three-circle model that was part of Intel's product architecture for its product lifecycle. We'll talk a little bit more about life cycles here in a bit. But a successful product and solution is something that balances these three concerns: the business concerns, the economic aspects of your product, the technology concerns, how things get implemented, how things are built, what is the actual implementation of your balanced product, and then usage, which centers on the user and things like user experience. How does the user conceptualize and think about how they might use your product to get a job done? So we need to balance all three of these aspects. Now, if you are a project manager, this is just maybe a little bit of my bias, but in terms of my history as a project manager, we tend to be oriented as project managers kind of on the top part of this framework. So we're concerned about things like cost estimates and bill of materials and vendor management and requirements and specifications and implementation plans and funding and business goals and things of that nature. Project managers are very well versed with a huge set of skills and techniques and methods oriented towards managing the top aspects of this model. But successful products, you actually need to cover all regions, all 6 of these regions. And so essentially what that means is that the bottom portion of the model is a bit like the dark side of the moon to a typical project manager, right? It's not what they're maybe perhaps familiar with unless they've received training. So if you are a project manager and you're thinking about transitioning to a product manager, you will absolutely need to kind of augment and develop some new skills, things like value propositions and user experience design, service design. What's the job to be done for your product? What's the go-to-market plan? What are the affordances enabled by user interfaces? What are personas and user research? These are all, I guess, incremental skills that you need to add to your bag of tricks if you want to become a more well-rounded product manager. And obviously, there's classes on this, there's books to read, but it is going to be a journey. It is a new profession for many trying to make that shift. Another thing that's going to shift is the product life cycle, right? So projects have a project life cycle and products have a product life cycle. And so if your organization is thinking about making the shift from project to product, you should obviously spend a little bit of time thinking about what your product life cycle is. So the life cycle is really just a framework for managing what work needs to happen, from taking a product from its very early stages of conception all the way through retirement and obsolescence. So it's a way of thinking about kind of what work needs to happen at what time and what sequence, what criteria needs to be true for us to say that we've passed from this phase of the product life cycle to the next phase of the product life cycle. And I'm not going to really go much more into detail here in terms of describing what the shift looks like, other than to say that if you don't have a product life cycle, this is probably a good time to start to think about what that might look like for your development organization. And the one tidbit I have here in terms of a tip is to not name your product life cycle stages after activities. And it's a bit of a funny metaphor here is to think about the life cycle of a frog, right? So the life cycle of a frog, has it starts with an egg, right? And develops the embryo in the egg, and then turns into a tadpole, and then the tadpole turns into a frog. And so you could say the egg stage of the frog life cycle is a bit like, maybe we'll call it the floating stage. This is the stage where this thing called a frog floats. And then you have the next stage, which is the tadpole stage, and we'll call this the swimming stage, right? So we go from floating to swimming. And then the final stage of the frog life cycle is hopping. So we're going from floating to swimming to hopping. And it's not too long before you realize, and some wise guy raises their hand and they'll say things like, but does not a frog also float? Doesn't a tadpole float? Doesn't a frog swim? Right? So how could this thing that's hopping also be swimming and floating? Right? And you start to get all twisted up in terms of what activities happen when. So my one tip for you is to name the states of your life cycle after the states that your product is in. So this is one way of doing that. Again, borrowing from Intel's product lifecycle that I was trained on at the time, back in the day. But here we have a life cycle that goes from opportunity to concept to candidate to solution to obsolescence. So this is naming the states of your life cycle after the state of the product versus an activity. So that's just one nice quick tip if you're developing or you're revising, editing your product life cycle. Another major shift is, of course, the budgeting and funding shift. This is going to be hard for a lot of people to kind of, get their heads around. We already talked about kind of the incremental aspect of project funding and product funding. So this particular slide is actually less about the a more nimble and flexible, adaptable approach to funding. It's more about how do you structure your funding categories, right? So we're going to be shifting from funding projects to now funding products or product families or product lines or value streams or business capabilities. And so if you're thinking about reorganizing your budget that's currently comprised of a bunch of projects, and organize them into products, I think especially if you're like an IT organization, I think one nice way of starting to organize this around a bit of a product taxonomy is to start thinking about business capability models. If you're not familiar with business capability models, I included one here from Lean IX. There's a reference there at the bottom, but you can also Wikipedia business capability models. There are other vendors out there with their own taxonomies and frameworks, but think about the business capabilities as, all the applications associated with HR and people management, all the applications associated with accounting controls and finance or quality or supply chain management, right? So it's just a way to start to organize all of your projects, all of your applications, all of your systems into maybe a more cohesive arrangement that's centered on business capabilities instead of projects. Another major shift, there's so many, this is a lot of work, guys. Another major shift are all the organizational capabilities that you need to shift in your development organization. And this isn't meant to be exhaustive, but if you think about your just one organizational capability for now, we'll take the PMO. So most IT organizations have or technology development organizations more generally have a project management office, sometimes called a program management office or a portfolio management office. But this is the office that is essentially the caretakers of the project management system and ecosystem. And this is kind of a litany of things that office may or may not provide, depending on the company you're in, depending on the size. If you're a large government organization, if you're a Fortune 25 enterprise, or you a smaller company that's just getting started and you have a very kind of nascent PMO, these are all some of the services that are afforded by PMO offices. So I think an interesting thing to think about as your organization is shifting from project to product is to think through whatever your current instantiation is for a PMO today, what is the essentially moral equivalent of that in the world of product, right? What is your product management office or your product and portfolio management office provide? What is the equivalent of governance from the project world? What does governance look like in the product world? And you could go through the list of things here, and I'm just going to call out one, which has to do with mentorship for product roles, right? Again, this is another quick anecdote from working with a former client of mine. They were trying to stand up triads in arts and things like that. So a triad is kind of the system engineer, the system architect, the RTE, release train engineer, and the product manager. And just by the way the organization was constructed, a lot of the RTE roles were being pulled from senior project managers with a very well-established kind of career path, career progression ladder, lots of talent and skill development in the profession of project management. The architects had their own, systems and professions set up for training, mentoring, onboarding, developing a very junior architect to a mid-grade architect to a very senior architect. But the product manager had nothing. They had nothing. And they were essentially lamenting their fate that they didn't, they would look over at their RTE triad and they had all the support and services. And they looked over at their architect and they had all the support and services. And then they were like, where's mine? I need my fair share of support and mentoring and coaching to develop in my career as a product manager. So I think that's another really nice thing for you guys to think about when you're shifting from project to product is what are all the services that might be offered by a product management office or a PPO. Another major shift has to do with lean portfolio management. And I think a lot of organizations that already have some sort of instantiation of lean portfolio management, assuming it's chock full of projects. What does it mean when you shift your lean portfolio from projects to product? And I think one of the things that jumps out for me, at least, is this idea that we probably need to do more than a one-size-fits-all approach to portfolio management. A lot of lean portfolio management folks get started with things like cost of delay and WSJF, way to shortage job first, from Don Reinertsen. It's a fantastic way to get started. But if you are thinking about your portfolio now of products and not projects, I think you should consider other frameworks and optimization schemes for optimizing a portfolio of products. One of my favorites, it's well known, I think, out in the industry, it's called the 3 Horizons framework, pioneered by McKinsey in a paper and in a book, The Alchemy of Growth. And essentially what it says is that there's actually 3 time horizons we need to optimize for. There's the near-term time horizon. This is kind of the bread and butter of your business. We want to maintain and defend whatever is our core. We want to nurture the emerging business opportunities that are going to be part of our core in 1 to 3 years. And then we also want to invest a little bit of money and budget in things that are much farther out, revolutionary new businesses or new customer segments, new products, etc. And really the key here, this is, if you don't remember anything, the thing I want you to remember is that you want Horizon 3 products to compete for budgeting and funding with other Horizon 3 products. You want Horizon 2 to compete with Horizon 2. You want Horizon 1 to compete with Horizon 1. I think one of the things that gets lost a bit if you're just using a single optimization heuristic like WSJF is that the Horizon 3 opportunities are much more uncertain. They're much, wider error bands in terms of your estimates, both upside and downside. And because of that, some of these assumptions that you make to try and quantify a number for WSJF is just a complete swag, right? And I think in a lot of cases, even the Horizon 1s are a complete swag. So maybe Horizon 3 is perhaps even more uncertain and ambiguous. So I would recommend a different optimization heuristic for each of these three horizons, and don't use a one size fits all like WSJF. WSJF could probably get you by in Horizon 1, but that's it. Okay, another thing that's going to obviously shift for you, and it's going to take some time to work through, are power and authority shifts. So obviously there could be any number of potential conflicts amongst leadership teams as organizational structures get changed, reporting structures change, your whole prioritization and portfolio managements get changed, risk management responsibilities are going to change. So any one of these could cause a row, right, a kerfuffle in the upper echelons of your organization amongst senior leaders. And so really, if you're thinking about the shift from project to product, it's really nice to kind of invest in advance of that, right? So do take the time to clarify why this change is needed, establish clear lines of communication, have a very cohesive strategy of what this change is going to look like and how the shift is going to happen. And then if you're a leadership team, definitely do take the time to invest in developing trust and relationships with one another. Sometimes a new leader may be brought in externally, right? Or some from a different part of the organization, someone you don't have a relationship with. And as you make the shift from project to product, that person may take on more authority or less authority. And there's gonna, I don't know, if you don't have a healthy relationship with that person, that's going to make that transition even more difficult because you don't have that relationship to fall back on, and there will be problems. So anything else you can do to make clear, transparent, situationally appropriate approaches to decision making, that would also help as well. So you could say things like, if we ever do need to make a new decision or we need to change this optimization heuristic, here's the people that are going to make that decision. Here are the different kind of decision rights at a high level and how decisions are made. All right, so those are the major shifts. Again, I think there are some easy things you could do, and obviously some of these will take quite a long period of time. To make this a little bit more palatable, I curated a set of things what I think are kind of non-regrettable moves. So these are things that wherever you're at in the organization, you could start to think about and have conversations about changing and navigating the shift from project to product, whether you're a lone product owner supporting a Scrum team, whether you're an RTE, whether you're a portfolio manager running lean portfolio management, or maybe you're an engineering manager, senior leader, whatever level you're at in the organization. I think one easy, non-regrettable move that anyone can do is start to think about what are your products. So whatever you're working on, what are your products? So think about that Apple AirPod example. Where do you draw the boundaries around your product? What are all the hardware, services, firmware associated with your product? Putting together some sort of product taxonomy and product model, that's always a very good first step, non-regrettable time. You're going to get it wrong. It's going to take a lot of iteration and changes to make it better. It'll probably never be right. That's a nice non-regrettable move for everyone. Closing product feedback loops is always going to be a good thing, especially things like benefits realization. How do you actually know that your product, whether maybe it's a set of features, maybe it's a brand new product itself, is actually producing the expected benefits from a business perspective and from a user perspective? Is someone actually able to use your product to get a job done? And what does that realization look like? So that's another non-regrettable move that even if you're working on an established project team, you can start to think about that. Obviously, more iterations equals faster feedback. That's always going to be a good thing. So to the degree that you can get more project iterations and have more stable teams or crew structures. We didn't really talk much about crews, but that would be another interesting hack to the Tuckman model. Think about like an airplane bomber crew or a flight crew on an aircraft, right? So the last time you took a commercial flight on American Airlines or Southwest or your carrier of choice, did that flight crew have to go through the Tuckman model of forming, storming, norming, performing. No, they did not. They did not. And that's because they had a crew structure where people were trained in roles with clear lines of responsibility and protocols for working with each other. So, if you can't migrate towards more stable project teams, maybe you could have project crews as an intermediate step. Redefining or defining success for products and recognizing that delivery, right, delivering value is only part of the definition of success, right? Delivering something is not the finish line, right? Having something used in production to get a job done and produce the benefits as expected is the finish line. And getting better at doing small things. I think a lot of large enterprises are really oriented and structured to deliver really big things well, but they're actually really horrible and inefficient at delivering small things well. So I'm going to end you with a thought about value based on point number 6 here. I think this is going to be the year of generative AI meme art and talks, and so I'm going to pile on with one from borrowing from a James Bond film, The Quantum of Solace, and I'm going to ask you to think about the quantum of value. What is your development organization's quantum of value? And quantum, I mean in the sense of like quantum physics. It's a packet. It's a package of something, right? What is the smallest packet of value that your organization currently produces? What is the smallest thing that you can exchange for value? What is the smallest thing that you could put into use? Does something need to get bundled up into a big major release that happens, once a year, twice a year, 4 times a year? If that's the case, your quantum of value is quarterly. How do you shrink your quantum of value of where something can get funded, developed, tested, put in production, and used in the smallest packet possible? So the degree that you can collapse how value is created, captured, and delivered, I think that's going to benefit you in the long run, especially as things become more complex and dynamic and our ecosystems are constantly changing. So if you can, shrink your quantum of value. So with that, I'm going to turn it over for Q&A and questions. There's a link to the slides if you want the slides. That's usually the first question I get asked in my talks. But I'm happy to turn it over to anyone that wants to ask a question, or maybe something came up in the chat, Steve. I'm not sure.
It's been an active conversation in the chat, but no questions directly. Yeah, so does anyone have a question for Dan? We've got one from Ken. Can you talk about how you get stakeholders to transition?
Yeah, so I would like to hear a little bit more from Ken about what that question is, but my initial interpretation of that question is, if you have a project and you're working on a project team, you have a set of stakeholders. And then you say, okay, well, what if this thing was a product, right? And what are the stakeholders of the product? And is that a different set of stakeholders than the project stakeholders? So I do think you will have a different set of stakeholders as you transition to product. I think some of the new stakeholders are going to be things like people using the product, people supporting the product. I guess those are the maybe top 2 that jump out to me. But Ken, if you want to come off mute, if I didn't hit the nail on the head on your question, I'd be happy to take another swing at it.
Sure. No, you did. Thanks so much for that. I was just wondering about when people transition over from project, traditional mindsets and things of that sort, how do they get over to that product type of delivery going forward? Just how do you engage them, better ways of engaging them or something of that nature? So
yeah, I think one thing that jumps out to me that to help with the engagement is to say things like, project management is still important. We still need to deliver on time, on scope, on budget. A lot of the skill sets she had around planning, around stakeholder analysis techniques and things like that, those are still going to be valid. We just need to augment and add this other orientation of product. And again, much like the dark side of the moon metaphor, what that means is we need to care more about things like user experience, about value propositions. How do we start to fold in things like that, concerns like that, into our existing processes? And that's a nice way of maybe engaging stakeholders early on in a I don't know, I wouldn't say less combative way, but as a yes and way of engaging them.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. I think I see a question here from Monica. Do you have a framework of how to make investment and funding decisions across products in the same time horizon? I want to hear more about that, Monica, but I think in general, funding happens, like, let's say we're in the middle of February here, so we're going through a funding cycle. I think the important thing is to fund these three buckets of Horizon 1, Horizon 2, Horizon 3. They each get a little bit of money to do what they do, to make the investments that they need to make. So it's more like, I think of this as three maybe parallel investments that are being made today, circa February 15th, across these time horizons that when products are actually going to mature and hit the marketplace.
Yeah, my question was more around when you have multiple products in each of these parallel streams.
Yeah.
How do you, is there a way to, and these are all unique products, so they all delivering different kind of value to the end user. Is there a way to measure across them so you can, funding is always finite, right? So you have to kind of decide one product have more funding than the other one.
Yeah, so if we'll just start with the easy one, like the Horizon 1, bucket. So let's say you have 20, 50, 100 products in Horizon 1. People use things like WSJF, right, to prioritize what gets funded and doesn't get funded in Horizon 1. They use things like net present value and IRR and expected rates of return and things of that nature to prioritize what gets funded. There's also things like, what's your corporate strategy? What's your corporate objectives? And of course you have, the HIPPOs, right? The highest paid person's opinion that informs what gets prioritized or not prioritized. So those are just some heuristics that would go into Horizon 1. Horizon 2 should have a different set of optimization heuristics as Horizon 3. So I think the important thing here is to develop a set of optimization prioritization heuristics that are fit for purpose for each of those time horizons, for each of those levels of complexity that you're trying to optimize for.
Yep, that makes sense. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. And how does service management? I see one more question. Is that it for questions?
I have one. This is Stacy.
Oh, go for it, Stacy. Hey,
Hi, Dan.
You get privilege.
My name is Stacy, and I got a question. My question has to do with it's an interesting conversation I had this morning about companies like Neodyne that have long-term investments that are more geared towards Horizon 3, right? They're looking at 3, 5, 10 years out what AI is going to be.
Yeah.
But the products that we're working on don't necessarily get funded. Well, they're getting funded at a lower level, like at a I hate to say it, like at a program level. Would it be safe to say that in some companies, I'll say that some companies, although the strategy is towards Horizon 3, that Horizon 1 is most important to what we work on. And then I ran into another example where the opposite happened, where Horizon 1, Horizon 2 are more urgent because we're not talking about 3 to 5 years out. We're trying to like stabilize current products and build new products for immediate revenue in the future. How would you recommend someone dealing with that situation where companies tell me to focus on more Horizon 1, Horizon 2 level things, but my product's not going to survive if I don't invest heavily in Horizon 2 and Horizon 3, really.
Yeah, I think the way I would maybe reframe that a bit, I'm going to give you two answers. Let's say the way the three horizons, and at least the way I initially described it, is portfolios of product in Horizon 1, portfolios of different products in Horizon 2, and portfolios of different products yet in Horizon 3. Now, there's a common heuristic here, and it's not kind of one size fits all for all companies, but companies like Intuit have talked about a 70-20-10 distribution of budgeting across those three buckets. So 70% in Horizon 1, 20% of your money goes in Horizon 2, 10% of your money goes into Horizon 3, and that's a way of essentially protecting that you're not starving, those Horizon 3 products in service of something of the kind of the tyranny of the urgent or whatever your business operates on today. So it's a good way to keep your business from being essentially disrupted by competition and things like that. So having separate buckets is super important. That's probably the biggest lesson. And whether it's 70-20-10 or 60-20-20, whatever that ratio is something that your organization could experiment with. And then the other thing I heard in your question, Stacy, is you could also use this framework for a single product. So let's say you're in charge of a large product, right? And you have a portfolio of features, right, that you're thinking about for this product, and you want to make sure it survives in the long run. So you could do a 3 horizons analysis for your features in Horizon 1, for your features in Horizon 2, and for your features in Horizon 3. So that's another way of making sure as a product manager that your product has legs, that it's going to be able to sustain itself over time because you're investing in those Horizon 3 features as well as the Horizon 1 features.
That's great. That makes total sense. Thank you. And yeah, I appreciate that. So really carry it throughout every level of your product, which on feature level, you can go above, even go outside of trying to disrupt yourself with planning Horizon 3. Yep.
Another really nice framework is the Core Context Analysis Framework by Jeffrey Moore. That's another one I recommend as well. Jim, I see your hands up.
Yeah, you started to answer my question just now. I'm kind of wondering what range of breakdowns of those 3 buckets you've seen companies do. You mentioned the 70-20-10 and maybe a 60-20-20. What else have you seen out there in terms of how companies have apportioned those reserves?
Yeah, I think in the extreme case would be like a new company. So let's say you're a startup, right? You're 2 people in a garage, right? You don't even have a book of business that you're trying to maintain. So that would be an extreme case maybe where perhaps everything is Horizon 2. Everything's like a near term 1 to 3 years out, and there is no book of business today. So maybe it's 0-100 or 0-80-20 or something like that, perhaps, as another extreme example. And again, I think the conversation is what's important. I don't know that there is a one size fits. There is not a one size fits all answer here.
No, I was just curious about the range you've seen, but I certainly know there are a lot of long established companies that don't have a bucket 3.
Yeah,
barely have a bucket 2, and they're just kind of milking the cash cows.
Yep, and maybe that's appropriate, right? If I don't know, there's other
until they get disrupted.
Yeah, what if you own like a rock salt business, right? And you're there to produce piles of rock salt so people could sand the streets in the winter, right? That's all Horizon 1. I don't know. There's a lot of innovation.
And then the Himalayan pink stuff starts coming in and skimming the cream off the market, and now you have to sell your road salt cheaper.
Yeah, and then the drones and the robots take over, and yeah.
Very good. Thanks.
Yep. All right. Any other last minute questions? We got 2 minutes left. I haven't been monitoring chat, Steve. Maybe you could bail me out and see if I missed anything.
Nope, just lots of thank yous for doing a great job. Interesting topic. So.
All right. Thank you all.
Dan.
Yeah, go ahead.
I was just wondering, both a project manager and a product manager, they both require leadership skills, right?
Of course. Yes.
Okay, yes. The thing is, like, I'm trying to become a Scrum Master, and I've been told that being a Scrum Master also requires leadership skills as well. So but the thing is, I don't have any much prior experience as a leader. So like, is there like, what would you say are some ways for me to like gain leadership experience and leadership skills as well? Like,
Yeah, certainly in your role as Scrum Master, that is a leadership position as far as I'm concerned. Um,
uh,
Tons and tons of way to develop your leadership skills, books, follow your mentors and figure out what they're doing. So like one of my favorite leaders for better or for worse, is Elon Musk. I know he's a little bit, I don't know, challenging, I would say at times, perhaps not the appetite for everybody, but I really, really genuinely love his principles, first principles, kind of engineering leadership style. So I certainly draw inspiration from folks like him, but find your own inspirational leaders. A couple of books I would recommend are things like Managing to Learn, which is a leadership kind of frontline leadership book from LEI, the Lean Enterprise Institute. I also like Farber's work, Radical Leap Re-Energized. So there's a couple of recommendations there, but there's tons of lean leadership philosophy books to read, and the gurus are out there. Go and spend time learning and putting things into practice with your Scrum team.
but have you had any previous experience with Scrum as well? Like, have you
Oh,
used
yes.
Scrum? Yes.
Yes.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Have you also worked with Scrum? So you've worked with Scrum Masters before?
Yes.
Okay, I see. So,
Yeah.
like, what would you? So the Scrum Masters that you worked with before, they all like, uh, they all act as leaders often in their day-to-day jobs as Scrum Masters.
Yes, I think we need to be a little bit careful about our definitions, but I think leadership is a role, it's not a position.
Yeah, yeah.
Mhm. Excellent. Well, thank you, everyone. I know we're a little bit over, but one more question. Go ahead. We have a hand up.
Hi. So kind of going off the last question about leadership, what do you think are the best practices or the best approach to, quote unquote, leading without authority?
Yeah, I really like David Marquet's work on intent-based leadership. I think that's pretty fantastic. I know we're coming up on time. I'm happy to hang out and have more questions, but I do want to call the clock on the time. If people need to get on about their day, go to their next meeting, go have a bite for lunch, wherever you're at. I do thank you for your time and attention, and I will hang out a little bit longer. Thanks, everyone.
Very gracious. Thanks, everyone. Have a great afternoon. So yeah, continue on that, because I'm interested in obviously Marquet's work as well. I'm a big fan. So what are your thoughts on intent-based leadership and kind of from a 30,000-foot view?
Yeah, I think I've actually turned his framework into a bit of a assessment as well. I was working with the drug development team, so these would be like PhD oncologists working as a Scrum team of sorts, or probably more like Kanban, honestly. But any rate, the kind of product owner, they weren't called the product owner, but essentially in that type of capacity. If you're familiar with Scrum, I'm just using a little bit of shorthand on the roles. But one of the assessments we did was to use Marquet's framework and essentially ask the two questions to her team. Do you have the clarity that you need to know what the right thing to do is? And then do you have the skills, the competencies to do that thing correctly? Is it safe part in his framework? And so we took the drug development team's organizational competencies. I think there was something like 15 or 20 of them. And we asked each of the team members, do you have the clarity that you need to do this job? And do you have the skills that you need to do this job? And we just did a quick, X by Y analysis on that. We figured out which ones were below the line, which ones were above the line. For the things that were low in competency, we queued up some additional training. For the things that were low on clarity, we had the person in the product owner role do a little bit more, I don't know, spending time with the team to provide that strategic clarity that they needed.
Very cool. I bet David would be proud.
Yes. He's
Awesome.
a great guy. Yes.
Well, thank you very much again, Dan, and being gracious and hanging out with us over time. It was a super interesting talk, and we look forward to having you back and doing it again in the future.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Awesome. Take care, everyone. Have a great afternoon.